Thank you both very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Perdue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Dunford, how would you define victory now? And first of all, I applaud the regional strategy that the administration and you guys are authoring right now. I've espoused that for years, having some background in Pakistan. The relationship between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia, China is critical to the solution in Afghanistan, obviously. But how would you now define for the American people after 16 years, what is our current view of what victory looks like in Afghanistan?
Senator, I think it's probably 4 components. The first is that we would defeat ISIS and Al-Qaeda, those specific terrorist groups, and then prevent the other 18 groups that operate from South Asia from conducting an attack against the United States, the American people, or our partners. I think the second component would be that the Afghan security forces, with a minimal amount of international support, can provide security inside of Afghanistan. I think the third component would be supporting President Ghani's initiative to secure 80% of the population in the key economic centers within the next 4 years. He's outlined a plan to do that. And I think the fourth element is supporting the reconciliation process, and specifically an Afghan-led peace process that allows people to solve their problems through that process as opposed to on the battlefield. Those would be the 4 components that I believe, particularly as you look at it through the military dimension, are necessary for us to be successful.
Including the Taliban in those negotiations, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. It would be an Afghan-led process, but include the Taliban so that they no longer are addressing their grievances on the battlefield, but they're part of an Afghan peace process.
So from an expectation point of view, we've had soldiers, men and women in Japan, Germany for 70 years. The question is it reasonable to expect, and the first definition of victory, about ISIS and the other 18 potential terrorist threats out there, is this a static point in time, or is this a dynamic thing that we have to ensure over the future, really?
Senator, I believe we have enduring interests in South Asia, and those enduring interests are going to require over time a diplomatic presence, an economic presence, and a military presence. I think the nature of that diplomatic, economic, and military commitment will change over time. So in that perspective, the military commitment that we have right now is a moment in time. I expect that contribution, the military contribution, will decrease over time as the Afghan forces have stood up. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think we just pulled off our advisory effort prematurely before the Afghans were capable of taking the fight on their own. In my judgment, it'll be a few years, but in my judgment, the Afghans will get to the point where the much lower level of support, they'll be capable of actually securing Afghanistan.
Thank you. Secretary Mattis, I was just over in Afghanistan, met with, and Pakistan, spent the day with General Bajwa. We went up to the border area and so forth. He intimated that he was willing to cooperate in joint efforts, and I noticed that he's there just this week. Met President Ghani, who also was supportive of that idea. That was back in July. I think time is of the essence here. I'd really love to see more of that potential cross-border cooperation, particularly with the Haqqani network. My question relates to Russia. General Nicholson said, both on that trip and also in public recently, back in December 16, Russia has overtly lent legitimacy to the Taliban by claiming that the Taliban is fighting ISIS. So it looks like we have a joint foe there. The question I have is, Russia, China, and Pakistan just held a conference in December of 2016 on Afghanistan without inviting the Afghans or India, advocating for reconciliation with the Taliban, including the delisting of Taliban leaders as terrorists. What is Russia's end game in Afghanistan today, and how do we counter it in the long-term strategy?
Senator, I'm concerned that Russia is not operating in its own best interest with what it's doing down in South Asia. Secretary Tillerson is engaged with his counterpart in Moscow on this issue, and we'll try to bring some strategic thought into this situation. But I can tell you that we have concerns about what Russia is doing. It may be no deeper than just, if there's an opportunity to, poke us in the eye, they'll do it, even if it's against their own interests. But it defies logic that they would see any benefit to engaging the way they have with these other 2 countries in light of the apparent support. And I can't define that support right now. We're trying to get the intel on it, and figure out why Russia is going this way. As far as the other two, I think what we're seeing is Russia trying to be a player in terms of the South Asia outcomes. And I think it's much better we all work together on this rather than exclusively.
Thank you both. Thank you.